Hey guys, I'm Liana Ruppert, still working on a new intro because I am unemployed at the moment, but working on some really cool projects and some cool contract work in the meantime, which I haven't had the freedom to do for the last 2 years, so I'm catching up on some shenanigans that I love, so we're all good. We're good. But today I wanted to talk about because layoffs keep being a thing in the industry, and when you've become a part of those layoffs, you are a part of those ongoing stories. And one of the things that I'm seeing a lot of is that it's very apparent that y'all don't actually know what a community manager does. I want to preface this that every studio treats their community managers differently in terms of what their scope looks like, what their responsibilities are. So what I am going to talk about specifically is just my role at Bungie. This is not to say this is what community managers look like across the board. This is not to say one is better or worse. I'm also not going to be sharing anything that I'm not allowed to share, like NDA stuff, obviously. But I wanted to talk about what do community managers actually do. Right out of the gate, everybody's like, oh my god, you needed money to write a tweet? We didn't have access to the socials. The Destiny 2 social team, yeah, but other than that, that is the social team. The social team handles the socials, not the community manager team. Some studios conflate the two and have them kind of pull double, and some don't. Some like to keep it firmly separate. For the role at Bungie, we had nothing to do with social media. We could contribute funny GIF ideas or meme ideas, but outside of that, that was squarely on Griffin, Andy, and Mitch, which are all three amazing individuals. And Griffin is also on the hunt for his next venture, as he was also impacted by layoffs. So if you are a role that is looking for a genius of a social, why can't I say that? Social media manager, he's honestly one of the best. So getting that out of the way, that is not what we do. So what does a social media manager actually do? Well, you have to be very good at data analytics. You cannot do your role if you're not good with data. You don't know how to get data, read between the lines of data, source data that's not organically findable, find new sources of data, weed through the shit of the data that is buried under fix your game, dead game. I know. You think that's helpful, but I promise you, it's not. It actually makes it harder because you're wading through more stuff to get to the part that actually helps the game and helps make any game better. So data is a big one. For us, we worked with a lot of different programs to source data from all socials, big and small, as well as survey data, which is very important because not everybody is on social media. Some people are happy and they stay offline. So that's where supplemental data like surveys come into, summit management as well, where we would curate lists of a handful of people to come behind the scenes and look at what's coming new. A big misconception is that was only big content creators, and I don't know what it was like before I was there, but I kind of took over the summits once I joined, and I always made sure there were big creators in because they do have a wider lens, because they have people in their chat talking about what they want. So they do have a little bit more perspective in addition to their own. But we would also include people that aren't content creators at all or had 1 to 20 followers. Like it didn't matter. What mattered was, are you good at giving feedback in a respectful, helpful way? That was the thing that was the most important to us. If you're just telling us we suck in all the ways that we deserve to die, that's not going to help us create the better game. But if you're able to be like, I don't like this, here's how I would like to see it happen, understanding that they have a very limited understanding of the development cycle, because you really don't. The amount of times we want to say to a response where somebody will tell us something on social or in a video and it sounds really good, but it's all just factually incorrect, too damn high. We're obviously not going to do that. We want to hear what you say. And also hearing all the ways you think you know something and it being incorrect helps us just as much, because now we know areas that we need to clarify on or provide some context that might be needed. So that's kind of helpful. But we did not only source big creators. For the Destiny community, if you're watching, Fallout will absolutely adhere to that. He's been in a couple summits with me, and he's seen the type of people that we bring in, and it's definitely a hodgepodge, and it's from people from different countries, from different gaming backgrounds, from different skill sets, PvP only, PvE only, blends of the two, casual, veteran, whatever. It's all important. You need to have all of the angles being considered, because if you're looking, especially for a game like Destiny, where there is a multitude of microcosms under one umbrella, which is not a norm in games and is actually very hurtful to a game and kind of makes everything you do running up a hill, it's important to have those different perspectives present. Like for Destiny, people only think it's PvP versus PvE players, and no, you got the RPG crowd, you got the MMO crowd, you've got the shooter crowd, you've got the tabletop crowd. There's a big circle cross connection with tabletop. You've got all these different microcosms that need X amount of features and X amount of communication to be happy. But the problem is what the PvE crowd needs is very different from what the PvP crowd has. So when you have just two microcosms, that's complicated as hell. Destiny didn't have two microcosms. It had like 6 or 7. So at that point, it becomes, which community do you piss off the least? Which community will be okay with minor frustrations versus this is a game-breaking experience? So that's kind of something that I think that a lot of people don't really realize, is that that especially for a game like Destiny, there is so many levels of complication that are involved in that because of the nature of the communities and the player bases and the marketing target audiences that are included in that, and they all want something different from each other. There's no real cohesion. And you see that sometimes with weapon balances, where people are like, this is such a great weapon balance for PvP, but holy shit, does it suck at PvE. So then the teams will do more specific PvE challenges or more PvE challenges and more focus. But then the other group that's not being as focused on during that time, which you don't see what actually is happening, is that the next round will be for you. But again, that's behind closed doors. You can't blame people for what they can't see. They will start targeting stuff that will specifically target one versus the other, and then move on to the other one and kind of alternate that way, which is more time costly, but overall is better for the entire community. That's kind of something that is very overlooked, and it's something that requires a lot of player patience and player trust, which is why when you start getting into brand trust damage territory versus just a specific community damage territory, it's bad, because that trust of the players is very, very, very important. And once you lose that, you've lost a huge foothold with your community, and you're gonna have to invest some time and a lot of money into repairing that damage, which is unfortunate and does have a trickle down negative impact on the rest of the studio. That's the thing too with Destiny. A game like Destiny is it's live service. It's very competitive with itself, but it's a trickle effect. Everything trickles down, and eventually the players, it may take a while for players to see it, but eventually you'll get there, which I'm not saying what that's referring to, but I'm sure you can read the lines in between what I'm saying. So it's very important that there is a trust with internally too, with the publishing teams, the marketing team, the developer teams, the accessibility teams, the triage teams, the leadership teams, the shareholders. Like, all of that trust is paramount in being able to create an effective creative venture. You know, when you're doing something creative, whether it's painting or writing or singing or whatever, is it easier for you to create under a supported environment or an angry environment? When you were in school and you had that substitute teacher that was a huge asshole, did you feel like learning from somebody that belittled you? Probably not. You probably felt a little resentful or burnt out from trying to protect your mental health on top of working something that's very demanding, and that unfortunately does not breed well for a creative environment. You cannot create if your mind is not right, if your mind is too busy fighting other battles. And that is something that I think gets lost on a lot of different game communities out there. Call of Duty, Battlefield, Overwatch, smaller games like Path of Titans. You know, you create better when you're supported, and that includes internal support, and that includes external support as well. If you're constantly having to fight the fight, what energy do you have left over for actually creating the thing you're there to create? There's a lot of components to it. Another thing that we did that I really, really, really enjoyed, a lot of it I enjoyed because I'm just nosy. I like to be in everybody's business. I'm a former investigative journalist. It's what we do. We're in people's business. It's who we are. But we would have weekly syncs with every team: weapons, armor, combat, abilities, commerce, all of it, where they would share their upcoming plans, and through a community sentiment lens, we would discuss those plans. Is there anything that's a big red flag that we should mitigate from? The community will never know some of the more controversial changes that the community team itself and player support team itself were able to convince not to happen, because we did our job right. You'll never know. You'll never know. One, because of NDAs, but you'll never know some of the stuff that was going to make it into the game, and it will not, because we understand the community more than people think we do, and we were able to take that aforementioned data talked about earlier and craft it in a way into a readable, understandable report that can be read by different teams, because you cannot speak the same way to the weapons team that you can to the abilities team. They speak different languages, and if you tried, you're going to have a lot of stuff lost in translation. So now when you have these sentiment reports and these data reports that are for new features or new directions going forward, you also have to make sure that you understand the language of that team. And that is a very hard thing to do. I will say that myself and Bruno were very good at this. And we were very good at this because we were able to learn under people like DMG and Cosmo, who have perfected that. And it's something that you can't really just know. You have to learn, but you have to dedicate a lot of time to learning that, because you can fake it. Sure, I know tons of people in this space that fake it. And if you talk to them, they sound like they know what they're talking about, but a lot of that is just masking that they don't actually understand the granularities, and those granularities are what can make or break an entire ideation period and rollout period of certain features. So that's those meetups are very important. Those syncs are very important. They're every single week, and they're also talking about things like that are in the game now, and here's what we think we should change. Like when you roll out a new feature, like here's what players are talking about, and that's not to say that everything a player says is going to make it into the game, because if that were the case, I don't even know what the hell kind of game that would be, but it would be a mess. There are so many times where I want to say, this is such a bad idea, but you can't, because you're not going to tell a player that. But players don't understand the full scope because they don't need to. They're not a dev. It is not their job to understand the intricacies of game development. It is their job to simply enjoy it. But the problem is that you have a lot of imposing ideas of what would make a game better or good or bad, and it sometimes directly opposes the truth or the actuality or what is even doable. Sometimes there's things that just are not doable, and when you are faced with that, it is your job as a team to find, okay, then what is doable? Is there something comparable that we can do? Is there a compromise somewhere that we can do? Or is this kind of one of those things we just have to count as a loss and keep searching? And that is a conversation that happens weekly, daily, hourly, and it's a very important conversation. And it's very important that the people that are having those conversations are actually knowledgeable on what they're talking about, not just good at sounding like they are. Oh my God, the stories I could tell. But I will say that I think that's what hit me the hardest with the recent round of layoffs is that's the thing I miss the most. I miss talking to the teams directly every day and supporting them and seeing when they're under-resourced and being able to be a part of that advocacy to get them the resources they need to make the cool shit they want to make. And I miss just seeing them talk and the pure joy they have when they're explaining something they're working on, and the pride they have and the joy they feel when players love it. And it's, you know, the antithesis of that is the sadness it was to see them get beat up on something that oftentimes wasn't even their choice. You know, they make the game, but they don't create the game, if that makes sense. That all comes from higher up. At the end of the day, it is a job, and you have to do what they tell you to do. or do what's within the means of the resources that you have available. Resources don't just pop out of nowhere. They're very expensive, and live service especially is a very expensive beast. I think people would be very, I need to stop saying I don't know when I started saying that so much. I didn't used to. But I think that there's a lot of conversation lost when looking at what a live service game actually costs. There are so many costs that are attached to live service that are not attached to single player games that make it a very expensive venture. Your servers, your upkeep, but a lot of it is the people, the triage teams that allocates when bugs get fixed when, because you only have X amount of people. You can't fix every bug at the same time. It's not sustainable. It's not realistic. You could hire 1,000 people and you still wouldn't be able to do that. But being able to smartly identify the areas that should be targeted first requires knowledgeable people with experience, and those type of people are expensive because you're paying for what they're worth. Well, with a live service game that has no subscription attached to it, like something like World of Warcraft or the ESO, Elder Scrolls Online voluntary premium experience that they have, you have to come up with that monetization other ways, and a lot of that comes through the means of cosmetics and event cards and things like that. Those feed into support for the studio. Those feed into the support for the teams that make the things you love. Those also feed into support for new projects that you might not be aware of. It all has a purpose. Do the rich get richer? Absolutely. But it also ensures that the not so rich also can put food on their tables because they have a paycheck coming in. It all serves a purpose. Does that mean also that those purposes do not get manipulated or maybe weaponized a little bit? Absolutely. That's business. We also are in America, the land of capitalism. So of course that's a thing, but I'm not talking about that right now. That's a whole other beast, a whole other video that I don't think I would ever make, because that is a minefield that I'm just honestly not in the headspace to be able to deal with right now. I think what I wish people would understand online when they're looking for holes to poke into what we post and what we say is, for me personally as an individual, this year has been hell for me. I did not make any secret that I was being targeted by a very hateful person that is very good at looking good and innocent. I am cozy. And they were hateful, and they made my life hell this last year at work, which is unfortunately a very common story across this industry. But aside from that, I buried a lot of friends this year. I had the skin cancer shit from this year. I had, my partner got laid off. There's also some things with my partner that nobody knows about that I'm not comfortable talking about, but are very difficult. And on top of the stress of work, on top of almost losing my house, which as somebody that grew up homeless, like off and on, like that is a very terrifying position to be in. And it's just, there's a lot of things going on in my personal life that put me in survival mode before layoffs happened. And now I'm one of the people laid off. And this industry, we've had over 6,500 people laid off this year in games alone. And a lot of those are still looking for work. Some are going on a year of unemployment because there's just no the work. Everybody keeps doing layoffs. The positions are disappearing. So a little grace is helpful. So the people that have been giving me some grace, I really appreciate you. But that's not the topic of this video. I think that there's a cost conversation that needs to happen industry-wide, where companies are a little bit more transparent on where that money is going, so we can build that bridge of understanding with players. Because there is not that understanding right now, and all it looks like is just pure greed. And sometimes that's not the case, and a little bit of grace goes a long way in those areas. For me personally, as a community manager, I also included accessibility in that work, which was actual dev work. I did dev work every day, and sometimes, unfortunately, that came with, sometimes I would have a seizure because I was one of the few people that was actually qualified to look at photosensitivity bugs and could deem when a harding test passed or failed and wasn't necessarily wholly accurate on the picture of danger. And I've been doing this a long time where I can eyeball it, but unfortunately that did put myself at risk sometimes. And that's just the nature of accessibility work sometimes, especially for a new initiative that isn't as supportive as it could be. And I hope, we did a lot to support that this last 2 years, and I hope that work continues because that team is incredible. Shout out to my co-lead, Drew Tucker, amazing individual, and he is over on the player support team, and he cares so much. It's ridiculous. A beautiful person, beautiful human being. And, but that was a part of it too, and that was daily. That was meeting with players with accommodation needs and identifying areas of improvement and coming up with pathways to rectify those when sometimes those pathways are expensive or very complicated or requires devs to move away from what they're currently working on. Never mind the fact that, again, it's a live service game. Destiny is built on its own engine, and the engine is not new. So that means a lot of technical issues all the time. You guys know this. That's the nature of any live service game, to be very honest. But Destiny in particular had its own set of issues just because of the nature of its own engine and server status and things like that. But what happens is when those bigger issues happen, the ones that need to be addressed and call in emergency triage, like the crafting issue, we worked all weekend on that. I was the CM that was on call all weekend, and I was in calls all weekend, sometimes at 1 o'clock in the morning, working on pulling all the levers to get things fixed. But what happens with that is you have to pull people from the teams that work on those features. We had weapons people in there, we had combat people in there, we had PvP people in there. But what that does is they now have to really focus on the issue at hand, which pulls them from what they're working on currently. So you're constantly in this state of reaction and proaction that is not sustainable long term. It's doable in short bursts, but for a long-term solution, it's just not sustainable, and it's not healthy, and it's not doable. Like, you cannot be two places at once. And that does, trickle into the areas of the game. That's why it's very important to invest in your community and your player support teams. Pay them livable wages. Let them have access to the resources that they need to have access to in order to help, because there is a bleed out effect where that will positively impact neighboring teams because of the nature of those weekly syncs. It absolutely has an effect wider than what is seeable within the immediate pool, and I think that often gets overlooked at a lot of studios, and the importance of a good community team is overlooked at a lot of important studios and player support teams because they don't necessarily see that ripple effect. They only see the immediate. I think too with community managers, it's very important that you are authentic. If you're trying to put a polite front up or trying to make yourself look a certain way, people pick up on that, and you need to have people that you feel comfortable representing you, and realize that sometimes that means people represent you in ways that you might not necessarily do, but that doesn't make it bad. Let them have fun with the community. And we had to foster those relationships and constantly be an eye and there are many times when I was off because I can't really have time to do it during working hours. But like when I would start my day, I'd start my day 3 or 4 hours before I needed to start. So I'd get up around 4:30 in the morning. And while I'm like making breakfast or coffee or something, I would be watching YouTube videos and seeing what the community is saying on that front. And pulling away from just the organic data pooling of just numbers, like getting that contextualization is very important, and it requires a knowledge of the game that is very intricate. If you don't understand the game, you won't understand your community, not in the way that you need to be as effective as possible. And I think that also is very much overlooked in terms of weighing the value of certain teams. Community managers also, like I said earlier, they really advocate for appropriate resources, and that is really important because happy teams make good shit. Unhappy teams don't make good shit. And if you're constantly having to replace people because of turnover, well, that's more time away from the game itself, because now you're worrying about onboarding and that sort of thing, which does pull people away from what they're supposed to be working on, which does impact the game on a public-facing level. Community managers are so much more than social media, but social media is very important in its own right. The only reason I'm not talking about what a social media manager does is because that was not my role, and I only had the visibility where it crossed over with our team. But they have their own shit that is very intricate, very complicated, complex, very nuanced. I would love to hear more from them. I would love it if one of them wanted to do a video. But there's something that is very overlooked in terms of community managers where, the blog posts are all public facing, but that is just a small part of what we do. The public facing stuff is such a small part of what we do. And I wish people understood that, because there's so much more that goes through this job. And community managers are notorious for being underpaid in this industry, which is nice, because I've interviewed with a couple of people, and a common response I've got is, oh, you were massively underpaid, not because Bungie paid horribly, but because they have kind of wisened up to exactly what the value is of a good community management team. And hearing other people advocate for me for a pay I deserve is really nice. I haven't gotten an offer so far that is less than $30,000 more a year than I was making. So it's nice. It's nice to feel that value, and to see that the industry is starting to change, where it is starting to evaluate what the value actually is versus what they think it is, and being able to comp that appropriately. We're also, there's so many stories I wish I could tell to show examples of this, but I can't. But I want to so bad. But there's so many times where we made very calculated moves that probably at first looked really bad, because the long-term gain was so good for the community. And in order to make those types of moves, you do have to understand your shit. You really do. But it's very interesting to hear like all the ways that people think community managers operate versus how they actually operate, and how off some of those speculations are, and just incorrect some of those speculations are. We're badasses, man. I have nothing but respect for every CM out there, all my fellow community managers. I see you. I love you. You are doing amazing. Make sure you're drinking your waters, taking your vitamins, getting your sleep, prioritizing that mental health, lean with that kindest foot forward, because you're amazing. And I hope that wherever you work as a community manager, you are valued for that, because you are irreplaceable and you're amazing and you're doing great. But it is a very rewarding job. It's hard. It's not for everybody. I know a lot of people that went into community management thinking that's what they wanted to do, and then realized, no, this is actually doing more harm to my mental health than good. And I'm proud of those type of people for having those realizations and then moving into a different space, because it takes more strength to make a decision like that than it does to push through it. I know people romanticize pushing through the pain, and that's strength. No, strength is knowing when to walk away. And I have nothing but respect for people like that. It's a big reason why I walked away from journalism and media, is recognizing when it was starting to do more harm to me as an individual than good, it's time to walk away. And but I love it. I'm built for it. People say mean things to you all the time, but here's the thing. None of that matters, to me at least. You don't know me, therefore nothing you could say about me even registers in my brain, because you don't know me, so why would your opinion matter to me? Now, your opinion about the game, that matters to me, because I'm being paid for it to matter to me. So I can push through the mean comments to get to the heart of the issue with no issue, and that's hard for some people to do. I think that comes from my military background, and then just years of working in media, because as media, I don't make the game, so you're not hurting me. But as media, especially as somebody that poured their heart and soul into everything they wrote, when people would attack that felt personal. But I had many, many years to harden that, so it's not an issue for me. My thing is just I have too strong of a sense of justice, and so when I saw justice not necessarily being there, I would fight against that. And sometimes when you fight for the good fight, it puts a target on your back. That's the case at any job in any industry. That's not a gaming only thing, but it doesn't mean I'm not going to keep doing it, because at the end of the day, I'm fighting not for myself, I'm fighting for our teams. And when you have good team health, everybody wins, But there's more to community manager than just social media. Oh my God, please stop saying that. It is so, it makes me just want to, But there's a lot, and if you have community managers you like, love them, support them, because I promise you they love and support you. And it's a very cool job if you have the bandwidth for it. And if you don't have the bandwidth for it, that is absolutely valid. And I think you should listen to that, because that is very important to have those honest conversations with yourself. And as well as having those honest conversations with your community. There's been a couple times in the last 2 years where I would ask the community, like, hey, I'm going through a really hard time right now. Just give me some grace. And most of the time people would listen. And that meant a lot, because it felt like family. It felt like, I think that's why it hit me the hardest is community. And I've said this in the layoff video, but there's just, community management is a very fun job, and it is a very rewarding job if it's for you. And yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to do it, and I'm excited to do it again in another studio and build those new relationships with new players and new devs, and I'm excited to see what happens in the future. But I hope that this video, I try not to ramble like I always do, but I mean, I'm at 31 minutes, so whoops. But I hope this video helped clarify some of the roles and the intricacies of it. Maybe I didn't do a good enough job explaining, and if that's the case, let me know, and maybe I could do a part 2. But there's so much more to it, and it requires knowledge, and it requires being able to wear a bunch of hats, and it requires being able to pivot on a dime, and then have the knowledge and the skills and the resources to pivot on a dime. And there's more to it that goes to it, and I promise you, there's not a community manager alive that doesn't care about you and that doesn't care about the game. It's just sometimes you can't see it, because game dev is an iceberg. The public facing shit is the very tip. You're not seeing any of the shit behind the scenes, and that behind the scenes magic is where you can really see the dedication and the skill and the love that goes into that craft. So that's me on what a community manager actually does within the scope of Bungie, because again, like I said at the start of this video, I'm not going to speak to other studios, because every studio does community management different. I have had a couple of interviews where I actually turned it down because what they actually wanted was a social media manager, and that's not what I'm looking for at this time. Not that there's anything wrong with that whatsoever. I was a social media manager back in the day, and I enjoyed it very much, but I worked really hard to get different skills that cannot be utilized, even sometimes in the community manager role, and that I'm looking to utilize because I enjoy that utilization very much. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. You don't have to like it. If you want to put a ring on it, you can do it by ring-a-ling-a-ling-ling that notification bell, I think. Is that what YouTubers say? The tickle. And subscribe if you're not subscribed. If not, that's cool. I'm not your mom. But I appreciate the hell out of you, and I hope you're drinking your water, and I hope you're prioritizing that self-care, and to just remember, always lead with that kindest foot forward. Thank you guys so much, and I will catch you guys next time. Bye.